Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Excited to talk about this one. We're always excited. Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Landis, football is king. Did you hear?
I did hear. I heard it from a very important person in the Ohio State Athletics Administration, in fact.
So this is what happened. We're backtracking a little bit to the introductory news conference of new athletic director Ross Bjork at Ohio State. And what we do here, we're letting you inside the bubble of what it's like to be a sports writer. This is what it's like. You turn on the audio recording on your phone, you put it on a chair, and then someone talks. And then back in the old day, you would have to listen to that and type out what they said. Now you pay for a transcription service and you don't have to type out anything. Now, it doesn't mean they get every word right, but you can listen back and sometimes the transcript, it's a robot. The robots are stupid, but most of the time they get it pretty right. So I will tell you this, a 30-minute news conference from Ross Bjork. The word king, according to my transcription, appeared twice in that news conference. Once was when I was called on. Doug Lesmerises, Kings of the North. That's one king. The other is when Ross Bjork said, and I directly quote, "We can be a broad-based program for sure, but what's king? Football, right?" That's the theme of this show. Football being king at Ohio State. Is this a revelation to you, Bill Landis?
I mean, no, of course not. But and it's not a revelation, I don't think, to anybody. Like, of course, football is king at Ohio State. But I think it's going to mean something different now moving forward. I think is what we're going to talk about.
I have had conversations with people at Ohio State in the football building in the past where they felt like there was the highest expectation for football at Ohio State, but not the highest commitment level. And that only means, like, frankly, it's kind of national title or bust at Ohio State every year, right? And are you willing to spend to push in a way that the team, okay, who else has national title or bust? 100 out of 100 on the expectation level. Bama, Georgia now, Texas, maybe falsely so, but not a ton. Okay. Ohio State, do you agree that generally the expectation level out of Ohio State is 100 out of 100?
Yes.
So they're not saying that Ohio State's not committed to football. They're saying if you're at a 93 out of 100 in your investment and you're willing to push, but your expectation level is 100, it's kind of not fair, or you're setting yourself up for disappointment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about here. The belief that has Ohio State, and we're going to talk about it in terms of all the things that have, so much is happening. We've been talking about it on the podcast daily. You guys have been covering it. It's on Snap Judgments, everything that has happened individually at Ohio State, from keeping NFL players to adding transfers to firing and hiring coaches. We are talking about it now on this show under the auspices of football is king. Do you believe that the investment and the willingness to push the envelope, however you want to take that, has existed at Ohio State in the recent past to the 100 out of 100 level that the expectations were?
No, not 100. Higher than almost everybody else, but not 100 out of 100. No.
There is no better way to set yourself up for disappointment in life than to have your efforts fall short of your expectations. This is one of my rules that I've learned as a parent. I'm passing on parenting advice to you, Bill, to young George.
I need it.
We had a situation with one of my daughters where they were in like a competition, an academic competition that was beyond their school. It just wasn't their school. It was a district competition. And, you know, I think my wife and I were observing, like, listen, it's not the end all be all. We noticed that perhaps our daughter is not putting in as much effort as she could for this thing. She's busy. She has a bunch of things going on. We're not upset that her effort level in this particular thing is not 100 out of 100. But then after the fact, when she didn't win, she was upset because her expectation level was 100 out of 100. And we were like, what are you doing? We could have told you that your expectation level should not be 100 out of 100. But all she did, and we're fine with that. But then it was like, okay, if this is what your expectation level is going to be, you've got to work harder. You've got to try harder. So I think Ohio State, perhaps, do you think that's a lesson that they needed to learn? Did they, because there's two choices there. You can either accept the fact that you're probably not going to win the district level competition, or you can try harder because there are people out there you're competing with who are absolutely 100 out of 100 on effort.
Yeah, that's definitely a lesson for Ohio State. And it's as much it's not merely like a resources conversation, which we will like. It's a mindset thing too. It's like, are you willing? And I'm not like I don't want to come off as like no. It's like, are you willing to do whatever it takes? But I don't want that to come off as like, are you willing to commit crimes? That's not.
I know
that's not what I'm. That's not exactly.
Rubbin's racing. Rubbin's
is racing. Yeah, like you know what it. I think you know what it takes. I think there's evidence to show you what it takes to be a team that is competing for national championships, not just like randomly rising up and winning one, but being there every single year. And there's a lot about Ohio State that is just sort of like inherent in Ohio State that gets you really close, I think, without even having to do much work. But I don't know that they've always been willing to go the full lengths to make sure that they're going to be there every single year.
Do you have full lengths vibes from Ted Carter, the new president, and Ross Bjork, the new AD?
Yes.
Okay. This is the conversation we're having. This is a broad conversation that we're going to dive into specifics, and helpfully, not coincidentally, I asked our tech subscribers what they think of this stuff. We've got to get the feelings of Ohio State fans. That's more important than what we think. And that's why we love the tech service, 614-662-4509. Our subscribers are ticking back up a little bit here in the offseason because there's so much happening. It's a valuable resource for us always, but we're charging you. It should be a valuable resource for you, and I believe it is. It's $6 a month, but you get a 2-week free trial. You send a text to 614-662-4509. If that does not work for you, you can also go to the website joinsubtext.com/thepodcastosu. But I always give out the number because that's easier to do. A lot of responses. I asked a bunch of questions. Do you think Ohio State as a university and athletic department has invested all it could and should into football over the years? This is in order of the most investment belief to the least investment belief, okay? Yes, the Buckeyes have been all in to spend and do whatever it takes to win in football. Only 12% said that, Bill. Only 12% of our tech subscribers said they've pushed it. They've been 100 out of 100. That's not a lot of people. Mm. Are you surprised that only 12% think they've gone all the way? Or do you think the general perception is a bit short of that?
No, I think that's in line with general perception. Yeah.
Mostly, yes. Ohio State cares a lot, but doesn't invest at quite the levels of the top SEC schools, 61%.
Yep.
Kind of, yes. Ohio State does well most of the time, but at moments falls short of full football commitment, 18%. And then no, they don't. So no, and it's not good that they've fallen short is 8%. No, and it is good. Like, I don't want my school to be at full football investment, right? I wanted to have that as a category, 1%. So only 9% are at no, which means 91% are either kind of, mostly, or all the way yes, but only 12% all the way yes. So that means we're short of 100 out of 100, but it's like kind of what you said, right? Almost there.
Yep.
I wanted to double check on this. Would you be concerned if Ohio State seemed to spend more or care more about football, perhaps to the detriment of other sports, other parts of the university, or its reputation? Because I don't think we can live in a world where there's all more without having to give something up. Do you believe that if they push it on football, something else, not maybe will suffer, but will be lessened?
Yeah, I think it's just hard to be both. And Ohio State, I think, is really the only program that's trying to be both.
Alabama and football, Stanford and everything else. But also, like, I think there's a lot of Ohio State people who, rightly so, are proud of their degree and maybe don't want their school to be seen as a football factory, right? That we are a university that has a good football team. We are not a football team that has a university attached to it. So I wanted to check. Not all of our tech subscribers, not all Ohio State fans are alums. You don't have to go to Ohio State to love Ohio State. No, I'm not concerned about it. I would have no concerns about an even greater football focus. What's your guess? I just said yes or no.
71%.
76. Very good by you. 24%. Yes, that would concern me. So, we're 3/4 of the way. Like, let's put the football pedal down and do this thing. Okay. Do you believe that with new president Ted Carter and new AD Ross Bjork, that Ohio State will push to invest even more in football in the future? 98% yes, 2% no. I think people like us are helping to fuel that perception, but you and I certainly got those vibes, yes?
100%, yeah. And it's less like it was definitely noticeable with Ross Bjork when you can, and it's not even Gene Smith is invested in football, but I think like Ross Bjork going out of his way to say football is king, like definitely stuck in my brain. It was more Ted Carter. Like it was kind of surprising actually to like hear Ohio State's university president put football on the pedestal the way that he did.
Some university presidents don't care as much about sports, and that's fine. There's a lot going on, man. This guy cares.
Mm-hmm.
This guy cares a lot, and he made that very clear. In your time as an OSU fan, have you ever felt like Ohio State needed to invest more and care more about football? Just yes or no. What percent yes? As a fan, I felt like they needed to do more in football.
80.
67.
Oh,
so 2/3. Okay. So we're talking about 60. 2/3 think, yeah, I felt in the past Ohio State needed to do more. And 75%, 3/4 are saying, I'm not afraid of more football. Football is king. We're there. Are we there?
Yeah, I think we're there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to understand that first. And now we're going to take a breath. It's one of these things again. I like saying obvious things and then pointing out why perhaps it's not as obvious as you think, but then in the end, it still kind of is obvious.
Yeah.
But this is like, I think you have to be inside Ohio State as someone who follows it every day like we do, as somebody who cares about it every day, like the viewers and the listeners on this show, like the people who are tech subscribers. I think from the outside, like if you were like talking to a Purdue fan and you're like, hey man, Ohio State doesn't care enough about football, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Right?
Yeah. He said like Ohio State's really going for it now. They're like, what have they been doing for the last 100 years?
Now they built that stadium in 1914. It was like building the Great Wall of China. What do you mean now? It was a field. They were like, you know what we need here? A place for 80,000 people to watch a football game. Now? But yet, I think it's right. And at the very least, it's the perception that we have I didn't have to pull this out of tech subscribers. Hey, have you felt like in your time as a fan that they were not doing enough for football? Yeah, 2/3 feel that. I think that would surprise national college football fans, other Big Ten football fans, that 2/3 of Ohio State fans felt that way.
I think it would too, which is why, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun when I say this, like the response to Ohio State doing what it has done this offseason, both in retaining players and attracting transfers, has been met with like, oh man, Ohio State's desperate. Like, I don't think that's what it is. I think like Ohio State is like realizing what it needs to be all of the time. It is now doing that. Yes, losing to Michigan 3 times in a row and not achieving your goals fuels that certainly, but I don't think it's merely that. And I don't even know if that's the chief motivating factor. I think that like Ryan Day and Ross Bjork and Ted Carter, who like are so new to this, like that they don't have a ton, I think, to do with what is happening currently or what has happened over the last couple of weeks, but I think will foster it moving forward, are just realizing what they need to become. And it's not because they're desperate for success in a way that like is making them reckless.
I was on Ari's show this week on The Athletic, and Ari brought up the word desperate, and I pushed back against the word desperate because desperate to me is like, I think Michigan, when Michigan brought in Jim Harbaugh, was desperate, right? And I don't even mean desperate. Obviously, has a negative connotation, and I don't know that it has to, right? But like, desperate to me implies failure. And again, this is where Ari and I part ways on a lot of stuff. Is like, I don't think what Ohio State has been doing from a football perspective in the last 3 years is failure. Like, hey, we're 3-9, we're desperate. Hey, we were 11-0 and favored to beat Michigan and we lost. That's not desperate to me. I do think invested is a better word than desperate. Maybe reinvested, maybe more invested than
More
ever.
invested.
But and this is a great debate that my college roommate and I had, Bill. I know when you like it when I talk life.
Mhm.
Nobody likes it, but I talk it anyway. We had a discussion about motivation and like a doctor. If you're a doctor and you are driven by a God complex, you are driven by internal ego, you are driven by the desire to prove how smart you are and make a lot of money, or you are a doctor that is driven by altruistic means, a doctor who wants to help people, right? Two very different motivations. If you cut somebody open and fix them and save their life, who cares about the motivation?
Right.
That's where I am. Let it be about your ego. Just save me. And my friend was like, wait, what about like altruism? It's like, I don't care. So there's almost a part of this that it's like, listen, brother, they got after it at NIL. They finally fired the unqualified assistant coaches. I don't know that it matters whether it's desperation or reinvestment. It's just action.
Right.
Action matters. But people do want to get caught up in motivations. So if you want to get caught up in motivations and say that the reason Ohio State's doing it is because they are desperate, then I'll talk motivations with you. But I actually don't know that the motivation, like, make your team better. But if we're going to talk motivations, I don't think desperate's the right word.
I don't think desperate. I like more invested better certainly than desperate. And I would be more interested, I think, in the conversation about motivation if I thought that this was like a one-time thing, but I don't think it is. I just think it's like the beginning of a new Ohio State moving forward.
Yeah, where football is king. We'll be
Yeah.
right back on Kings of Columbus. All right, back on Kings of Columbus. We certainly would direct you to Kings of the North, where we just recorded a show ranking the 26 quarterback situations in Northern college football. Where does Ohio State fit into that? Where does Michigan fit into that? Where does Penn State fit into that? All of our Northern teams, as you guys know, that started off here on the podcast feed. It's now been taken out of that. So we would really ask for you guys to subscribe to Kings of the North on YouTube, to Kings of the North, wherever you listen to podcasts, to make sure we talk a lot of Ohio State there, because Ohio State matters in the North, of course. So if you like what Bill and I do, if you haven't listened to Kings of the North lately, we would love it if you tried it out. Football is king. Football is king as it relates to retaining NIL players. So this is, again, we're going to talk about all the things that have happened. I will tell you, maybe this is not a surprise. This is the thing that texters, that the loyal, dedicated, educated fans, Bill, care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb Downs is great. Will Howard is great. Quinjon Judkins is great. Bill O'Brien is great. Keeping their very good guys from going to the NFL is the number one thing that fans are excited about. Does that surprise you?
No, I think that shows a pretty good understanding of, I think, what it's going to take to win in college football moving forward, which is what conversations we've actually had on Kings of the North about the importance of experience and age. Like, certainly it's talent too, right? Like that's number one. We're talking about guys who could go to the NFL. But I think it's going to be increasingly harder in college football to try to win with like really good freshmen and sophomores. And you want to position yourself to try to win with really good juniors and seniors if you can afford to keep them. And I think Ohio State fans are understanding of that.
Do you believe this is a vital important of football, a vital part of football is king? Like being proactive in trying to keep your second through seventh round guys from jumping?
I do, yes. I think it's the most important thing. I don't know how many programs understand that, or maybe the better way of saying is like how many programs are actually positioned to do that, especially at the level that Ohio State just did it. But I think it's a huge piece of it, of sustainability in college football moving forward.
So again, what is desperation? What is whatever? I think Ohio State, and this is not blaming anybody, Ohio State really felt burned and was surprised and unprepared for Luke Whippler going to the NFL. And I don't know that it single-handedly set this in motion. And I don't know if they had been more aggressive with an NIL package. I don't know what they did to try to keep Luke Whippler at Ohio State. But A, do you think that affected their viewpoint? And B, by the way, how different might have Ohio State's season have been if they had veteran Luke Whippler at center instead of second-year Carson Hinsman, who frankly was asked to do that job probably a year earlier than anybody thought he would be?
I think that last season would have been very different if they were able to keep Luke Whippler at center and have a veteran in the middle of their offensive line. It's probably too much to say it's a difference between a national championship and not. But I think like generally the offense would have been better if they would have had Luke Whippler back at center, because it just would have shored up a lot of things for them. And I wonder last year, maybe it's just because it's more interesting to talk about, even if it like was pure fantasy the entire time. But there was like a lot of discussion about like, hey, Ohio State's trying to get CJ Stroud and Paris Johnson to come back. And like, why would you ever waste your time trying to get a top 10 pick to come back to your school? But I do wonder if Ohio State, as it was like trying to figure out the NIL stuff and get more organized than it had been the year previously, maybe spent too much time and bandwidth on stuff like that and not enough time and bandwidth on retaining like Luke Whippler and DeJuan Jones.
Really good point. And just think about that. Like, again, they've made other mistakes in recruiting and player acquisition that led to some of the that was real desperation, right? It's like, is Ohio State desperate at NIL? No. Are they desperate on the offensive line? They were last year, right? Because of those situations. This has been brought back up. I think it's made up. I don't know. This is one of these things. I am amazed sometimes by the people who are major players in college football who just retweet made up nonsense accounts.
Yep.
And Lane Kiffin retweeted a made-up nonsense account that had a made-up nonsense story. That source, I then saw like the fake source use the tweet that Lane Kiffin retweeted to say, see, I told you this, I was right. And it was like, your fake information is the source of this whole fake story from this fake site that Lane Kiffin is now citing. But Lane Kiffin is citing Ole Miss coach Ohio State spending in NIL, and there's a $13 million number that's cited in there. But the $13 million number first came up when Ryan Day said it in the summer of 2022 at an event that I was covering, and he said $13 million would be required to retain Ohio State's roster. So this was always their NIL plan, but I feel like that's the part of this that I think is weird. Like, it's not desperation. It actually is their plan all along. Mm-hmm. They're just finally executing it at the highest level. But even the fact, I'm ready to fight the South. Even the fact that the South is ticked that Ohio State is spending in NIL is proof that football is king. Because guess what? They think football is king down there. And when somebody challenges the throne, legally, you're allowed to do what they are doing. And they're taking it as if all Ohio State is doing is committing in the same way that the best Southern teams have been committed. And it makes the South nervous. It puts them on edge, and it makes them crazy. It makes them crazier than they already were, dog mentality. And it's like the proof that it's what Ohio State should be doing.
Oh yeah, it's fear. Yeah, so that means you're doing it. Yeah, that means you're doing it right. Yeah, I've also noticed it from Michigan too. Like Ohio State's trying to buy itself a national championship, which is hilarious considering what Michigan's done in the transfer portal the last couple of years.
And Michigan did this last year, retaining guys successfully.
I know it's exactly what Michigan did. But then I saw one Michigan account like tweet a picture of Jim Harbaugh holding the trophy, and it said like developed, not bought. When like they kept all their veterans, and I think they had like 9 transfers on their roster last year. It's exactly what Ohio State is doing.
Their top 35 guys last year, 27 homegrown, 8 transfers. Ohio State's top 35 guys last year, 32 homegrown, 3 transfers. Mm-hmm. Their whole key is strategic transfers and keeping your best players for year 4. It is such a good plan. Ohio State has stolen it and angered the South with it. Yeah. But why is Michigan? Come on. We have to do a whole show. It's a tough ask. At some point, there are moments when we're in the North, we're going to ask you to abandon your hatred for your rival and direct your hatred to the South. Just for moments. And this is one of them. Like, don't come after Ohio State. Be like, yeah, the North is finally doing it Southern style, but within the rules. So Lane Kiffin can cram it. But Michigan should be telling Lane Kiffin to cram it, not Ohio State to cram it. And Ohio State should acknowledge how successfully Michigan built a championship roster this season, and there is no better form of flattery than imitation. And so Ohio State's trying to do it the way Michigan did.
Yeah. Do you think, not to get on a sidetrack, do you think Lane Kiffin did that because he was mad or because he was trying to tell his boosters, like, hey, this is what it takes?
Probably more of the latter.
Yeah.
And if it's the last one, then good. That's fine.
Right. Because that's what Ryan Day was doing. Like, I know he said it to a room of donors, so it's like a little more direct. But I think he said that knowing it would get out.
Well, I mean, he didn't know I was there. But I snuck in. I didn't sneak in. I got an invitation. I got asked to sign up. I signed up for Cleveland.com. We had a table. It was like all these businesses, like, oh, Cleveland.com. I had a placard. And I put it on my table, and then I wrote down everything he said. But then I talked to him afterward. He knew I did it. But after the fact, he wasn't like, oh my God, you were here. Don't say anything. He didn't say that. He didn't say that when I was like, hey, that 13 million stuff was pretty interesting. Is this the new plan, or is this a one-off in this offseason when they had so many NFL guys who were not sure? Because their sure thing first rounder went, right?
Mm-hmm.
Marvin Harrison Jr. went. Everybody else, nobody else had quite of a slam dunk, no doubt about it, first round season. And there's so many of them. Is this the new plan and the new reality, or is part of this a unique circumstance?
I think part of it is unique because you have a lot of guys from the same recruiting class who sort of have made a quasi collective decision. Like I think they were all individual based mostly, and like dollar amounts are different probably for each guy, and draft feedback certainly is different for each guy. But there was at least part of it was the class for 2020 and 2021 recruiting class wanting to come back and like make one more run at this thing. So that in itself is probably a little unique. Is Ohio State going to have, 11 or so potential NFL draft guys who aren't first rounders every year? No, probably not. That's a higher number, I think, even for a place like Ohio State. So that's not replicable. I think like the effort, the idea, the thought process is the new normal. It's just a matter, like, is it always going to be this high of a number? Probably not. That'll depend on, the way the roster shakes out and the way the players develop.
And again, we think on Kings of the North, we said this should be the plan for the North. Like very much try to keep, NFL quality players who aren't first rounders, try to keep them for year 4 and 5. It's a really good plan for the North. I will say I asked 2 questions of the tech subscribers where keeping guys was the number one thing. For the success of Ohio State sports and football, rank the most important things that Ohio State did this offseason. I ranked 6 things. Number 1, kept so many good players from going to the NFL, was by far the number 1 answer. And then rank these moves into order of what excited you the most about Ohio State football this offseason. I included adding Caleb Downs, adding Will Howard, adding Quinshawn Judkins as all separate things, hiring Bill O'Brien, adding Julian Sayin, firing the assistants. All those things were separate categories, but number 1 was like keeping your favorite, your most important guy, whether it's Jack Sawyer or Mecca Booker or Travion Henderson or Jordan Hancock or Denzel Burke or JT Tuimoloau, whoever. That still was number 1 on the list. So again, a lot of, as exciting as the outside stuff is, and that's one of those things again. It's like, oh, you're trying to buy a championship with your own players.
Guys. Yeah, right.
What? Because what? Like it's like robbing your own house. If you are in your house and you carry your couch out to the lawn, you did not just rob yourself. But if you're in somebody else's house and you carry their couch out to the lawn, that's robbery.
Mm-hmm.
But if you pay them for their couch and then take it out to the lawn, that's just called buying stuff. So only one of those things is against the law. And it's not when it's your own couch. So anyway, that's my couch analogy. I don't carry couches anymore. I'm 50. You could still carry a couch, right?
Yeah, I think I could. They're actually, usually a little lighter than you're expecting. I think I could.
Well, if it's a sleeper sofa, it's not light.
Oh yeah, they're sneaky heavy. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next thing about football. So football is king. When football is king, you use NIL to retain your players. That's one thing. Yep. When football is king, you get more aggressive in the transfer portal. Ari used this word. He called a couple guys they added luxury items as opposed to like filling needs. So let me ask about this. Let me run through it real quick. So that your choice is luxury item or filling a need in the transfer portal. Will Howard, what is he?
Filling a need.
Seth McLaughlin at center. What is he?
Filling a need.
Owen Kazmarek at tight end. What is he?
Will Kazmarek.
I call him Owen. Why do I call him Owen Kazmarek? I've done it in my own head 19 times.
Do you have an Owen in your life that you're particularly fond of? Owen Wilson.
I have multiple Owens, actually.
Yeah. Nice.
A lot of young Owens that I know. Sorry, Will. Yeah. Can't help it.
Filling a need.
Caleb Downs at safety.
I think filling a need. They were losing a starting free safety and they replaced it with Caleb Downs.
It's like one of those things. It's like, I don't want to walk anymore, so I'm going to go buy a car. And it's like, oh, what'd you get? It's like, I bought a Ferrari. It's like, I thought you just wanted to get to work.
Yeah.
I needed a car. It's like, you could have gotten a Honda Accord. It's like, well, I really like the Ferrari.
Yeah.
Quinshon Judkins.
I think the same thing. I think the same analogy. Like as Caleb Downs, like they needed a second running back.
I would say Judkins is a luxury item because you could have gotten, I think, a substantial, knowing if you really knew in your heart, like if Trey leaves, now he's a need.
Yeah.
Knowing Trey was here and that you want somebody to take at least like 30% of the load from him, they got a guy that's going to take half the load. So I would call Judkins maybe the first luxury ad of Ohio State in the portal era.
But they needed a running back, right? Even if you knew Trey was staying, you have Trey, Dallin Hayden, and 2 freshmen.
They redshirted Dallin Hayden just for this moment.
They want 5 running backs.
Yeah, but couldn't you have added like?
Sure. Yes. The same way you could have added a backup safety from Conference USA, but you added Caleb Downs instead. It doesn't mean that the need wasn't there.
But he's not like. We're getting into a little bit of semantics. Caleb Downs is going to start and stay on the field every snap the whole year.
Yeah.
Quinshon Judkins is going to share time with TreVeyon Henderson. So like, if you, I mean, I understand what you're saying. If you didn't add a tight end or a quarterback or a center, we would have been like, I don't know what they're doing without those, but they filled those needs. If they had not added a safety, we did a whole thing. And we're like, all right, Malik Hartford, it's your time. This defense is still going to be great. So it wasn't a desperate need, but now that you have Caleb Downs, you plug him in, he plays every snap. If you said it's going to be 70% Trey and 30% Dallin Hayden, and we added this other guy to be the third guy, I think that would have been reasonable.
Sure. I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
And again, we're into semantics, but do you believe, so the main thing is, do you believe this is an adjustment? Is this a football is king transfer portal, adding guys adjustment this offseason?
No, I think this is still mostly true to how Ohio State has done it, which is addressing, I think, obvious needs. I guess I'm willing to concede that there's a part of the Quinshon Judkins edition that is luxury. It's not pure luxury. I think there's like a weird middle ground there with that one. And then like Caleb Downs, I think is more need than luxury, but also it's like the best player in the country at his position wants to come play for you. Like that's not, of course you're going to do that. Like, yes, it's aggressive, I suppose, but like, it's like a duh move. Like I don't know that I would actually paint that as something different than from how Ohio State has operated previously.
I mean, they just did care. They talked, but they talked in the past about not wanting to jump their own guys. I mean, part of it is their safety depth left. Really, probably the only guy who's like getting jumped by Caleb Downs is Malik Hartford, probably, and he's only a second-year guy.
He's a sophomore who can still start next year. Yeah,
and I mean, Dallin Hayden got jumped, right, for a guy who really helped bail him out when he was a true freshman. They saved him this year. Like for his expectation level to be in my third year in Columbus, I will be the number 2 back who has a role would not have been an unreasonable expectation for him, right?
No, and there was probably a time where he thought he was going to be the number 1 running back because we didn't know what TreVeyon was going to do.
And I don't know that maybe would there have been a time in the past where they would have taken that more into account and said, like, we love Quinshon Judkins, but man, like Dallin Hayden's done everything we asked. We know Trey's coming back, so we're not desperate. So we're going to ride with Trey and Dallin.
Yes, but if like Ohio State didn't necessarily go out and seek an upgrade over Dallin Hayden, I think an opportunity to take one was presented to them when they weren't expecting it. And I think the same thing is true of Caleb Downs. So like that makes it a little different for me. It's not like they didn't offer like 10 transfer running backs because they want to take somebody over Dallin Hayden. It's like the best running back in the portal like wanted to come to Ohio State.
But didn't Eli Ricks want to come to Ohio State and they were like, we've got J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock, we're good? Is that similar or no?
Yes, I think there was some off-field stuff with Eli Ricks too that
Yeah.
I think that the Jordan Hancock stuff was true. I also think it was probably overstated a bit to mask some other reasons.
I believe that their transfer approach is more aggressive this offseason and perhaps a sign of things to come, not a quantum leap, but an increase in aggression under football is king. You're leaning a little closer to this is still kind of how they've done business.
I think it's a step beyond. I think I agree with that. Yes. I would not consider it a quantum leap. I would not consider it like a sea change necessarily, but I think it is fairly a notch or two more toward the aggressive approach than they have used before. Yeah.
All right. Football is king. Mm-hmm. Number 2 in our ranking of the most important things they did this offseason, 1 was keeping the good NFL players. 2 was adding Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard, Seth McLaughlin, and Will Kazmarek in the portal. That was clearly number 2. And again, in terms of what excited you the most, adding Caleb Downs was second behind keeping a great player. Adding Will Howard was third. Adding Quinshon Judkins was fourth. So again, like this is a very important thing. Again, it's one of these things. Sometimes you get credit in the portal because of things you did wrong previously.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, the center thing didn't really work out. The quarterback thing didn't really work out. Congratulations on the new guys you added. It's like, well, in an ideal world where Carson Hinsman and Kyle McCord were both first team All Big Ten, neither of those things would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is what you also have to keep in mind with everybody in the portal. Like the portal is where you fix mistakes. And sometimes if you don't make that many mistakes, you don't have that much to fix. And then people are like, why don't you do more in the portal? And it's like, do you see all the good players that are here?
Right. That's why I've never really understood celebrating quantity in the transfer portal. Right. It's like, it means you don't know how to recruit out of high school or put a roster together.
Congratulations.
Quality, which is what Ohio State has done, I think is far more important, even though it's 6 editions, right? Not 13 like Ole Miss.
All right. Improving the coaching staff. Perry Eliano, Corey Dennis, Parker Fleming, let go. I think Perry Eliano is just like you hired a guy that you believed had a good resume and was a good hire. You did it for 2 years and it just wasn't quite right. But I think Perry Eliano absolutely was qualified to be hired by Ohio State the first time around. And I think that is more of a general move of like sometimes you have a guy that maybe is just not quite right, so you move on. Like, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and like there was some recruiting stuff baked into it. Like, funnily enough, like not getting Caleb Downs the first time, not getting KJ Bolden, and I also think too that there was probably a desire to, and I think clearly based on the move they made following it, to have like another Jim Knowles guy in the building, which they accomplished with McArary.
So I just want to make it clear that I'm not lumping in Perry Eliano, who made the playoff with Cincinnati, in with Parker Fleming and Corey Dennis.
I think it's very different. Yeah.
This is not anything I haven't said a million times along the way. I never thought Parker Fleming and Corey Dennis should have been hired here. I thought they were not qualified for the job. It doesn't mean they're bad coaches or terrible people. It means they're not qualified to work at Ohio State, and they did for too long. But to replace Corey Dennis with Bill O'Brien and to now have that special team spot that's probably going to be filled by a defensive coach and not have Parker Fleming here, that to me, that's a football is king. Sorry to my friends. It's not good enough move that I think is an important part of this offseason.
Yes, but again, born out of initial missteps. So I think
born out of bad hires that then it was born out that, oh, you didn't catch lightning in a bottle here with these guys. Like, it's not good enough.
Yeah. And born out of bad hires and also like misguided, like hiring tactics, I think by Ryan Day, like, favoring familiarity like far too much, favoring personal relationships or some sort of feeling of like being indebted to Urban Meyer far too much in the case of Corey Dennis. So part of this feels like Ryan Day like breaking away from that a little bit. But also, yes, I think under the guise of football is king, because it's not merely making the decision to get rid of those coaches, but like getting rid of an unqualified quarterback coach and replacing him with an NFL head coach is like a heck of a swing.
And by the way, I think this is a reality that like I certainly don't talk about all the time, but you have slots in your staff. And even like Perry Eliano was not very highly paid. I think these were the 3 lowest paid guys in the staff, right? Perry Eliano, Corey Dennis, and Parker Fleming. I'm almost sure that's correct.
Keenan Bailey might have been.
Keenan Bailey, he's a new guy too.
Yeah.
But like you can't have 10 assistant coaches who are all paid $1.5 million, right? You just can't. Nobody does.
Yeah.
But even like the commitment to go from the Corey Dennis salary slot to the Bill O'Brien salary slot, that's going to be $1 million increase.
At least.
It's going to be from like $500,000 to like 1.5 or 1.8 or something. Even that's a commitment. You've got to get somebody signing off on that. Because again, it's like, well, we have this slotted for our staff. And so that's a little bit like paying your guys, paying your assistants. I think they're paid too much. I think they're middle managers. I don't think it's what makes you win, because you should be able to hire good people. But it'll kill you if you hire the wrong people and keep them around too long.
Mm-hmm.
But even making that move, like having the permission to make that move, that this salary pool for the assistants is going to be sky high, man.
Yeah, because you have like Justin Fry's at $1 million, Brian Hartline is at $1 million, Larry Johnson's at $1 million, Jim Knowles is at 2 and probably over 2 now. We think he'll get a pay bump this year.
And then O'Brien's going to be maybe near.
I think O'Brien will be close to 2, if not 2. Yeah,
that's
we don't
wild.
have that information yet. Yeah, especially considering like we're not that far removed from 2016, right, when they had their first $1 million assistant with Greg Schiano. Am I remembering that correctly?
Oh yeah. No, I can remember at the 2013 Orange Bowl writing about Chad Morris making $1 million at Clemson, and that like when will Ohio State have that? Like that Tom, and like it being like, oh my God, $1 million assistant. Yeah. And they kept Greg Schiano and Ryan Day. Like they kept Ryan Day from going to the Titans, and they had Greg Schiano, and those are their first $2 million assistants. And now they have like 6.
They'll half their staff is. Yeah.
Pay the players, pay. Okay, so I did think maybe because we have talked about it with our tech subscribers for so long, and Parker Fleming and Corey Dennis have both been things. They have been like on my list of coaches that I don't think are qualified to work at Ohio State. I thought maybe when I asked, like, what's the most important thing? I thought maybe our tech subscribers would be like, oh, getting rid of them is even more important than Caleb Downs. They weren't. They understand football. They care about it. Firing the assistant 6 out of 7 on the things you're most excited about. And in terms of important, it was 4 out of 6. So the important stuff, keeping good NFL players 1, adding the portal guys 2, taking play calling off Day with the hiring of O'Brien 3, getting rid of the assistants 4, adding Julian Sayin 5, hiring Ross Bjork as AD is 6. So anyway, that's the most important stuff that happened this offseason. Okay, but I did think the coaching thing, right? It was enough of a change from Ryan Day that I thought it was a football is king kind of deal. It was a switch.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also again, the byproduct of some mishandlings beforehand, like acknowledging that you needed to balance out your staff, which is what we think Ryan Day will now do with this available spot for Parker Fleming, I think is a tip of the cap that way too.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is Ryan Day as the CEO. This is giving up play calling and hiring Bill O'Brien, which I think is in combination, because the reason that you hired Bill O'Brien is to take the burden off Ryan Day. Is this a football is king admission by Ryan Day? Almost like, I'm sitting on the throne, man. And so like when I'm wearing the crown, I can't be worrying about all this other side stuff.
Yeah, it's too big of an operation for you to be trying to do everything you were trying to do. So you need to do the thing that's most important, which is be the CEO.
And I really do think it is an admission of the weight and the size and the scope of what this job entails. And almost every head coach goes through it. Everybody, you're hired because of your play calling acumen on one side of the ball, and you want to keep it, A, because it's what got you the job, and B, because it's fun. Even Jim Tressel thought it was fun.
Yeah.
Playing calls is fun. Calling boosters is not fun. Babysitting recruits, not that fun. Firing people, not super fun. Having tough conversations with players and their parents about playing time, not super fun. Dealing with off-field issues with young men, not super fun. Talking to us, not super fun. Why did you get into it? Because you love the game and you want to dial it up and see if my chess pieces can beat your chess pieces. It's the most fun thing.
Yeah.
And when you are the prince of a smaller principality, right? If you're the king of Luxembourg, you could also be the play caller of Luxembourg, right? And that's what you think. It's like, there's not that much to do here, right? But now you're the king of, I don't know, what's a big country?
France.
Now, Ryan, hey, Ryan, I'd like to think of you as the king of France. Now you're the king of France, right? And it's like, we got wine stuff to deal with. There's an ocean over there to deal with. We got that big pointy thing that there's all these things to deal with. And so I think you don't realize sometimes all the things. And the other thing is things have been added since he became the head coach. So I think the realization and the aggressive step to find the person you trust to hand it to, you realize how big football is and how much it entails. And I think maybe that has nothing to do with what Ted Carter and Ross Bjork think, right? But it's Ryan Day within himself realizing, man, football is king and I'm the king. And when I'm the king, I don't have time to do everything else.
Ross Bjork might have a fundamental understanding of it because he just had to pay a coach $71 million who couldn't realize that himself. So,
yeah.
Ryan Day, I think, made the decision independent of Ross Bjork, but Ross Bjork has scars from this as well, I think. It's when Ryan Day took the job in 2019, I don't he could never have envisioned it would be what it is now in 2023. And I think it took him a couple of years, clearly, to kind of figure out what he wanted to be and how he wanted to go about doing this job in the new world. And you're right that, drawing up ball plays and just kind of coaching your guys is certainly more fun. Being the CEO is about, 10 times more lucrative. So
True.
I think that's the difference here for Ryan Day. If Ryan Day wants to be an offensive coordinator, there are a lot of programs in college football and in the NFL that would love to have him as their offensive coordinator. If he wants to make $10 million, then I think this is what he needed to become.
And I do think, and I'm trying, and I'm failing in the moment. I'm trying to think of an example of a guy who is a head coach and a play caller still, at a smaller college football program. But I think if Ryan Day was a head coach at Purdue, I think he could do both. And I think he would still want to do both.
Yeah.
Right? Even within a world where NIL and the portal and everything is more complicated. But I just think at a place like Ohio State, with all that is required, I think that's a realization by him. And that's why I do
Jeff Brom at Purdue would have been a good one.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Jeff Brom, if he stays at Louisville his whole life, probably never has to give it up because it's just not the same. Yeah. And the expectations aren't the same. But I think it fits under football as king. It's the realization of this is too big and too important for me to try to do two jobs.
It's realizing you are the king if you're Ryan Day, right?
And that takes some time too, just like anything, right? I mean, the queen is dead, long live the queen. You grow into it. He was like a kid. He's like one of those things where it's like you're the king of England when you're 8 or whatever, right? It's like you're the king, but are you really the king? And then it's like, oh no, I'm actually the king now.
Yeah.
Can you imagine living in a time where the person in charge of every aspect of your life was in 4th grade? I guess they didn't have the grades back in medieval times, but was 8. It's like, oh man, that guy's dad died. Now he's in charge of my life.
That's how people become protectorate, and then that's how wars start.
Yeah. I like those shows.
Yeah.
We should steal something from one of those shows sometimes. Okay. Ryan Day is the CEO. People, I think, again, it's not like they're not having parades in the street because Bill O'Brien is here, but I think people understand. That's been very clear from our texter interactions. People understand how big of a deal this was to add Bill O'Brien and take that off him. All right. Quarterback standards. Okay. This is one it's a little bit off in the distance. And so I think it really applies to football as king, but in terms of the excitement level, it was last. Adding freshman quarterback Julian Sayin to this team. He's the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2024. Aaron Noland was also a top 5 quarterback in the class of 2024. Bama commit, was at Bama for a month. It's a transfer, not a recruiting move. In terms of excitement, Is there? I didn't. Oh, Julian saying I gave 6 categories for excitement. It was 5th, ahead of only Ross Bjork, because a quarterback's still more exciting than an AD. So people like aren't jumping up and down about it as much because it really is not going to have an effect on the 2024 season.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought this was a huge football is king move to add a guy like that when you already have Aaron Noland in the same class.
Is it the biggest football is king move?
You tell me. Maybe.
I think it might be. I think that throughout Ryan Day's tenure, he has been described as like ruthless and aggressive when he necessarily hasn't been. And I think I mentioned this before. Like adding Justin Fields was pegged as this like, oh, I can't believe he did this ruthless kind of move. It's like the other option was Tate Martell, man.
Nah,
like,
don't be like that to your.
Listen, I love Tate. But like, let's be serious about what the situation was. Like Ohio State needed to get better at quarterback, and Justin Fields is available. That is not ruthless. That is obvious. And it was a great move. Like good for Ohio State for doing it. But of course, Ohio State did it. This is the ruthless thing. This is we recruited a top 5 quarterback for 2 years and signed him, and we were incredibly excited about him. And bringing in Julian Sayin doesn't mean that you're no longer excited about Aaron Noland. And Aaron Noland can certainly be this team's quarterback in the future over Julian Sayin. But you didn't have to do this if you were Ohio State. And they went out and were presented the opportunity to just add a really talented player that wasn't necessarily a need, and they did it. And I don't think they would have done that prior to this year. Like that to me, more so than any of the transfer additions, certainly is a difference in tactics from Ohio State.
So you watched The Godfather, right? You watched The Godfather?
I've never seen any of the Godfather films.
God.
Yeah.
I don't even know if we can do this anymore.
I've mentioned that before. It was like one of the first What You Watchings we did. I said I never saw it.
I forgot. Okay. So there's a thing at the end. Now I'm going to ruin it. Like there's a scene at the end of The Godfather when it's like Michael Corleone has like taken the mantle, right?
Yeah.
And it's his wife is like standing outside the door and she like sees inside and like he's doing business in there and like the door just shuts. And it's like that to me, it's like, I don't know, like it's like Aaron Noland like standing on the outside and it's like Ryan Day sitting in there and like the door just shuts. And the answer, like if Aaron Noland, and listen, by the way, it seems like Aaron Noland deserves, in any situation, Aaron Noland deserves a ton of credit and respect for the way he's handling his business, and nothing but good thoughts to whatever happens in that young man's career, because this is a tough spot to be in, right? But it's almost like if Aaron Noland said, Coach Day, why did you do this? Why did you drop another quarterback right on top of me in this class when I've been with you for a year? I think the answer is football's king.
Yeah.
Like this is the way we do business now at the highest level. And does that feel like a change to you? Do you think this would have happened a year ago?
I don't think this would have happened a year ago. No. It feels like a pretty, now it's not a situation that's going to present itself every year, right? And I think Ohio State is not, I think, going to be in the business of routinely trying to take 2 quarterbacks every cycle, like feelings be damned. But I don't think this is a move that Ryan Day would have made previously in his tenure. No.
And this is one of those where I still would believe that you can go too far with this. That if you just put on your football is king cape. Ooh. You want a cape? If I order a cape, do you want one?
I love a cape, yeah.
Yeah, football is king, and so are we. Football is king. You can't just put on your football is king cape and then have that be your answer to everything. Like, whoa, why'd you do this? Football's king. But I think it is a change. And I think at times, I mean, there are some of us maybe even in the business who are more reluctant about it than the people in the building and the fans and the players. And that, like, if you just understand, listen, the number one thing is making this team and this program as good as it can be. And honestly, there is no number 2. That's it.
Yep.
So every move we make is designed to make this team and program as good as possible. And that's my answer to everything. Now, you can disagree whether you think the move actually does that. Actually, you're making that move. I think it hurts the program. But if your problem with it is that you believe the motivations should be something different. Well, yeah, I agree. It does make the team better, but there's no but anymore. And maybe there was a but before, and I might be in favor of a but there. I don't know. I'm a soft old man. I might be in favor of like there are other things at times that come into play that might, in a certain circumstance, trump what's best for the program. There might not be anything that trumps anything anymore because football's king.
Yeah, and also too, like the sport has fundamentally changed. Like, and I think there is a generational aspect to this. Like looking through some of the text responses, I feel like I saw a lot of like, I've been an Ohio State fan for X number of years, and it's hard for me to get comfortable with this. But I think that's because this is maybe the most extreme example, at least that Ohio State has encountered, of like where the sport is going, which is like, I don't think that any program should be in the business of turning away good players because now rosters are just so easy to pick apart and it's so easy for them to blow up. And that is different, very much different about the sport. It is professional like, and I get that that's hard for people to wrap their mind around, or they don't want to because college football has always been kind of separate from that. But that genie's out of the bottle and it's not going back in. But I understand the sentiment, but I think that Ohio State has pushed past that to football is king. We have to do whatever is the best interest of the program.
And I do like, I thought maybe some of our answers would be lower percentages because you do hear that from people. Like, I'm not sure about this. But then in a world where we asked and 67% of the people say, hey, I felt at times in the past like they weren't doing enough. And 75% of the people are saying, I have no concerns about doing more. It's like, okay, this is like healthy majorities that people are in on this. And I do think there is a difference here. There's one thing with like the theoretical, whether it's rules or money or ways like that, where you're willing to show your commitment. And frankly, let's be honest. Let's be 100% honest. Some portion of this is bending rules, right? Are we being honest about that?
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to say breaking rules, but bending rules, right? Like, hey, listen, man, like the NCAA can't track everything. Like, we're not going to be Pollyanna about this. And we're not going to pretend they haven't bent or broken rules in the past.
It's a speed limit thing you've talked about in the past. Yeah.
But that is part of this. But then there's another thing when it's a person. So this is a person. And I think everybody loves what Aaron Noland is about. And so when you're doing this to a person, I do think that it does give you more of a pause at times because it's not a theoretical, should you take two quarterbacks? Would you take a guy No, this is, are you adding Julian Sand when you already have Aaron Noland? When Aaron Noland bailed you out when Dylan Raiola boogied on you, right?
Yeah.
Like all of that, it's real. It's not theoretical. And I think it's very natural. I think it's good for people to be more apprehensive when it's real people involved. But it feels like Aaron Noland's ready to stay here and battle it out with Julian Sand and let the best guy win and let the guy who doesn't win the starting job go off and have great success somewhere else. We've seen it happen before at Ohio State. So I guess that's where we are. And it's certainly where Ryan Day is.
Is that logic applied selectively at all to you? Like I'm wondering why Devin Brown, loyal as they come, could have left after Kyle McCord got the job. Could have left after this season if he wanted to, burned the boats and said he's coming back, and then they got Will Howard. The response to that was not the same as the response to them bringing in Julian Saying alongside Aaron Noland, both of whom have equal opportunity to be Ohio State's starting quarterback moving forward. Neither of whom really has any kind of equity in the program at this point. They're both brand new players. It's just interesting to me that received, and like you said, like strong reaction is probably the wrong way to put it because I think the majority of people were in favor of it, but I do feel like I heard much more negative reaction to that than I heard to bringing in a transfer quarterback over Devin Brown.
When you're a recruit and you haven't played, you're a puppy, and everybody loves puppies, and
That's
everybody also loves dogs. But once you're a dog, you probably like ripped up a pillow you weren't supposed to rip up. So it doesn't mean that people don't love you anymore, but you've done something wrong. And so it doesn't mean you're going to get rid of the dog, but it's like, it's not perfect and pristine the way a recruit is. A recruit is like a fresh snowfall, man. Every possibility in the world. And then like a guy who's played and made one bad throw, now it's just snow that you've got to shovel. Right? So it's like, it's still snow, but are you sledding in it, or you have to like get it off your car so you can go to work? Yeah. So like nobody loves. There's nothing that people love more than a fresh recruit who hasn't done anything yet.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. Last thing is high school recruiting. There's not like really a specific thing here, but like, do you think anything will change in its high school recruiting plan in the world where football is king? Will they be more national? Will they be more aggressive? Will they start doing more NIL in high school recruiting? Do you think we're on alert for that?
I don't know. This is the one that's interesting to me because clearly they've lost some battles, namely on the defensive line. Like I think most obviously on the defensive line the last couple of years, and I think we're purely NIL related. I guess my question is like, can you be or can you prioritize NIL for your current players, NIL for the transfer portal, and NIL for high school recruiting in a way that makes Ohio State better than it is right now? Like, I think, of course, they're involved in NIL for high school recruits. You have to be. It's table stakes now. But I don't know that I'm on alert for them to be significantly more aggressive on that front than they have been. I still think in like pecking order, and maybe it'll change cyclically depending on what the current roster looks like. But I think retaining currently good established players, adding high impact, ready to play now transfers would be above breaking the bank to make sure that you're going to have a baseline number of 5-star prospects in your recruiting class every year.
And that's if you have to make choices. If football is king, maybe you don't have to make choices. Maybe you're choice, maybe it's everything. Could you envision a meeting where President Ted Carter, athletic director Ross Bjork, football GM Mark Pantoni, and head coach Ryan Day are sitting around a table, and somebody in that room says, "We're not letting Miami steal our guys anymore"?
Yes, but I also think you have to do it within reason. Like I don't. It should never get to the point where you're recklessly spending just to say you outspent someone, right? I think the job of like college GMs, which is basically what Mark Pantoni now, is different because now you have to like assign monetary value to recruits and then determine whether or not it's worth it. Like if Miami wants to pay, and this is hypothetical because I have no idea what the numbers were. If Miami wants to pay Justin Scott like 2 times his market value just so they can have the optics of a good recruiting win, I don't know that Ohio State should do the same for optics reasons. I think Ohio State should take that money and then keep Tyleik Williams instead, or go find a transfer instead, right? So I don't know that Ohio State will ever go to that level.
We were talking about this with somebody else, like the idea of when you have like, we're at the point of having GMs of college football programs. The next step is salary cap experts of college football programs, which is different, which is why GMs in the NFL have salary cap experts. And sometimes the salary cap experts move up and become GMs, but there's a lot of GMs who are really smart about player evaluation that need help on how to spend the money. And we're probably there, as nuts as that is. Now, that wouldn't happen until NIL comes inside and we can talk more freely about like team programs spending their own money and actually spending money. And certainly the collective stuff isn't as hush-hush as it was when it first started. But like that's the next step. And there's a difference between talent evaluation and resource allocation. And at the highest levels of professional sports, they are equally important. And that's the next step, I think, for college football, because like right now it's, hey, this crazy Miami donor on his yacht just dropped $3 million into our collective account. Let's go get Justin Scott or whatever. And this is not to besmirch Justin Scott or Mark Fletcher or anybody who decommitted from Ohio State and went to Miami. They made the best decision for them. And part of that was NIL. Great. But if Ohio State feels like it's losing guys because of NIL in the high school recruiting world, will they be more aggressive about doing something about it? I think you're right. I think it's the 3rd out of 3 in the priority list, but I wonder how much it might look different in the next recruiting class.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's 3rd out of 3, it doesn't mean they can't be more aggressive with it. And part of that is resources too. Like I can see the pool of cash changing year to year too, depending on like donations and all that stuff. And also, I guess who you're going after, so that'll factor into it too. But I also I think there needs to be at least while programs are spending wildly on unproven high school recruits, and like I get why some of them do for sure. I think smart programs need to almost take like a Moneyball approach to it at times. Like if it's if, again, just to use a player, like if Justin Scott's going to cost you $1.5 million, is it worth to spend that on one player? Or is it worth it to spend it on 3 players who can give you the same amount of production you're going to get from Justin Scott?
Right. And maybe one of those 3 turns out to be just as good as Justin Scott.
Yeah.
You get more shots, right? So you trade down in the draft and get more draft picks. So like I think this is one worth watching because football is king would matter to this approach. It's not something that's like front of mind right now because we're not getting ready to see everybody sign a recruiting class, but it's certainly part of the discussion. Okay. Last 2 things on this topic before we switch to our big last thing at the end. People have asked me to do this. The texters asked me to do this because I did this sort of like before Caleb Downs, before some other things happened. What is your level of excitement, enthusiasm for this Ohio State season? Scale of 1 to 10. 1 is low, 10 is high. It was like a 9.02 before.
Yeah.
Caleb Downs, and people are like, do it again. I want to give it a 10. Overall, 9.65. And like 80% of the answers are 10s. So like that's like it's you can't ever get everybody to vote 10 on something.
Yeah.
But like 80% of the people are out of 10 and like the other 20% are out of 9. So like it's through the roof.
I thought it was going to be like one of those cartoon thermometers where it just keeps going and then the glass breaks and it goes up.
Mercury all over yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then the other one is what best fits your opinion on Ryan Day based off this offseason? I still have doubts about Ryan Day. I always believed in Ryan Day, and this offseason just confirmed it, or I have much more confidence in Ryan Day based on Ohio State's offseason. What do you think one of those 3?
I have more confidence.
I always believed in Ryan Day, and this offseason confirms it 47%. I have more confidence because of the offseason, 42%.
Okay.
Doubts remain 11%. So that's still like half the people who are like, man, I'm in with this guy before this. So it's a reminder. If you think all your friends want Ryan Day fired, it's just not a reality. But they're winning the offseason, and the head coach is winning the offseason, and that's a wonderful thing in January. But we know that's not the end goal here. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the balance between football and every other sport at Ohio State. How much should football be king? We'll do it next on Kings of Columbus. So, Bill, we're gonna bring in the other sports conversation a little bit because we talked about this when we did our snap judgments after the news conference introducing the new AD, like the balance of this, like that. Again, I can't remember where it came up. Bama and football, Stanford and everything else, and how you try to do this. Where I can't remember what I say on a show and what I just say, like in regular conversation. Like I think about it as a meter, right? And so if the needle is straight up, like the 2 ends are all football and complete balance, right? That like I want all 36 sports to be treated equally, right? Those are the 2 ends. So if you're like right in the middle of that, right? You're at 50%, right? But would you lean more towards football or more towards the holistic, full athletic department goals, right? So like we're trying to think about that. If you're like, I want to balance dedication to football and dedication to holistic athletic department goals. I want to win a national championship in football and I want to win the Director's Cup. Both are super important to me. That's right in the middle. That's 50-50.
Yep.
Where would you be? Where would your needle be?
I would probably be like 70-30 toward football.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think that's what I would say too. I think I really would. I think that's about it. Like 70 to 75 towards football. And so like I tried to ask the texters this, and it's difficult to sort of do. We do have a 10-point rating scale. So I tried to do it and I said, listen, like all football's one end and holistic athletic department's the other end. And they wound up at 7.75, which would be like 77% football, which is right around us. So that is an admirable goal. I think if that's the goal, 70 to 75% football, 25% holistic athletic department. I think some stuff has to change at Ohio State.
Like, I would agree with that. Yeah.
You would agree with that. So then I asked this other question. Should Ohio State keep 36 varsity sports? Here's where it came out. Yes, mostly yes. But if players are getting directly paid and cutting a couple sports is necessary, I would get it, right? That's sort of like if we get to that world, okay, there's going to be like $20 or $50 million or whatever that they now have to take out of their athletic department budget, which they've never done before, and directly pay players, something has to give. 65% of the people say that.
Mm-hmm.
Keep 36 sports no matter what is 18%. Cut sports, this is too many. If you cut some sports, it would benefit the athletic department, is 16%. So the edges are relatively small and equal, and the middle is where everybody is. Where are you?
It's hard because like currently I'm more of try to keep all the sports if you can, because the way it's structured, it's still like paying for the players is still like an outside thing, right? And I remember like having this conversation maybe 2 recruiting cycles ago when Ohio State was like kind of getting its butt kicked on the NIL front. People were talking about cutting sports as if that might help Ohio State be more competitive in NIL for football. And like logically, that didn't make any sense to me, because as much as you wanted to, the money that you spend on a tennis program can't just magically be applied to paying football players. It's not the way it works. That's not the way it's done anywhere. I guess there's some conversation to be had about like donations and pointing people who might want to donate to the rifle program and instead telling them to donate to the NIL fund of your choice. But even that doesn't really feel like it's addressing the issue. Just kind of felt like people were looking for something to blame because Ohio State wasn't organized with NIL. But if we are going to get to, and I think we are going to get to, and I think Ross Bjork clearly believes, and Ted Carter as well, that we are going to get to some sort of revenue sharing model for players where the money that is being brought in by the athletic department, some of that is going to go back out to the players, then I am more on board with you have to cut sports because it just doesn't feel sustainable. So, and if you wanted to get out in front of that, I guess, because otherwise you're just delaying the inevitable, I wouldn't have much of a problem with that.
I did a story. So I covered the 2012 Olympics. So I was doing some Olympic stories around that. And I did a story about how a place like Ohio State funds the American Olympic movement because Ohio State creates Olympians in a lot of, and they call them Olympic sports, right?
Yep.
Because when else do those sports get attention? They get them once every 4 years during the Olympics.
Right.
So how do they do that? For football players. Football funds. There's not a national movement in America to fund, to create opportunities to train. Not at a large level. Our college sports system drives our Olympic movement, and football, and to a lesser degree, men's basketball drives our college sports system. The problem is nobody ever asked the football players if they want to fund the fencing team.
Right.
So there's not an unlimited amount of money. And so I actually think Ohio State has too many sports. And this all brings out people who push back against that. More often than not, people push back against it when they have family members or a personal interest in a specific niche sport. So like, that's one of those things. It's like, there's just not a lot of people who care about some of these sports like organically. So I think they're going to get to that point. And I do think sometimes that we get too up in arms when sports that do not have a lot of general interest are cut. And if a sport is cut, it means that there's no longer scholarships in that. Doesn't mean you can't play it. There might be some kind of intramural level. There might be a club sport where you can still play your sport. You're just not maybe getting paid to come to school to play the sport that very few people care about, which is the place that it gets me. It's like, I'm sorry that not many people care about your sport. It doesn't mean your sport shouldn't exist. It just means that nobody should get money for college to play a sport that very few people care about. And that's what we're talking about. The investment that, there's a big investment in scholarships for all these sports. Of course, there are Title IX implications. Of course, you need and want to have opportunities for lots of female athletes, and football is a big driver for men's sports. But like, I think sometimes we go too far with you're denying opportunities. People are denied opportunities all the time because they're the things they like, people don't care about. So then you have to fund it yourself. That's all. It's not that it's illegal to fence. Oh, hey, is that an epee or a saber? All right, you're coming with me. Put your hands behind your back. Didn't you know Ohio State cut fencing and we also made it illegal in the state of Ohio? That's not what we would do. It just would be a club sport and you could still compete against other schools. There would just be no scholarships and maybe you'd have to go in a van. And maybe you wouldn't get to stay overnight, but there's lots of activities that already exist that way. Because there's not enough interest. So like that, I can get my hackles up very quickly about this, because really what people want is not opportunity. They just want somebody else to pay for their opportunity, even though nobody cares about it.
So do you think they're going to do it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I thought that every time in that news conference that Ted Carter and Ross Bjork said, we want to have 36 sports, they immediately followed it with a but.
Yeah.
And Gene Smith was not in the business of buts on that discussion previously.
He was not. It was like if there was one thing Gene Smith, I think, could preserve about his legacy at Ohio State, it's that Ohio State has 36 varsity sports. It's very important to him, it's like, I get it. Like, yeah,
it's admirable. It's great.
Yeah.
But it comes at a cost. And if the cost is keeping money out of the pockets of football players who put their bodies and brains on the line and fuel an entire unpaid industry, and like now we're going to pay some of them, that comes first.
Yes.
That's more important than fencing. I'm risking getting CTE in front of millions of people. Give me some money is more important than fencing. That's just what I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I've changed my view on it too, over like significantly, I think, over the last couple of years. Because it's just the way that college football is going. It's slow to react. It's not where it should be. And we're going to be slow to get to where it needs to be, but it is eventually going to get there. And then this becomes a reality where you have to make hard decisions about where the money goes. And it needs to go to the football players, I think, before it goes to anybody in the way that things are currently structured.
And listen, in a world where you and I and the tech subscribers are all leaning 70, 75%, there's no other solution. I don't think you can be at 75% football and fund 35 other sports. You just can't.
I don't think so either.
And it's coincidental that we plan to talk about this anyway, but Ohio State came out with its latest athletic department financial report on Tuesday morning. And I just went through it very quickly. It's a 98-page report. It's all in tables. You guys, if you Google it, you'll find it. It's on Ohio State's university website, but just shorthand. And it's their accounting of revenues and expenses. So I just did math. I didn't even do calculator math. I just did like quickie math. Revenues, expenses. Football, $55 million ahead. Men's basketball, $10 million ahead. Okay. So that's $65 million. That means the other sports are $65 million under. $31 million under for all the other men's sports, $34 million under for the women's sports. That's just the reality. That's just the accounting. For example, baseball, minus 2.5 million in a year. Men's ice hockey, minus 3.2 million. Men's lacrosse, minus 2 million. Men's swimming and diving, minus 2.8 million. Men's track and field, minus 2.1 million. Wrestling, 1.6 million down. Women's volleyball, minus 2 million. Women's swimming and diving, minus 3 million. Women's rowing, minus 3 million. But by the way, they have like 90 athletes in rowing. Mm-hmm. That is a sport where you catch up with a lot of the Title IX evening out. So like $3 million for 90 athletes is actually pretty good. Women's ice hockey, minus 3 million. Women's basketball, minus 5.3 million. Nobody's cut women's basketball, but it's just a reality. And that doesn't mean, and then some of the other sports, like everybody's under at least, like the sport that loses the least amount of money is women's golf, and it's 750,000 under, right? So 34 sports lose money to make money. And the calculus is changing. That's all. We're not out to get anybody. It's just a realistic discussion. And if you're going to dedicate yourself to keeping every other sport, no matter what, you cannot be at the football investment that 75% of our texters say they want, Bill. So that's just a hard reality that is coming down the pike. It's not what we talk about most of the time here, but any sports fan, you just have to wrap your head around it. And the answer cannot be keep making the football players play for free. A scholarship's enough. Mm-hmm. It's coincidental, but not coincidental that the most violent sport is also the most popular sport. Now, listen, women's soccer and men's soccer is violent too. They're putting their brains and bodies on the line. There's a lot of athletes that are doing that, but nobody does it quite like football. And that is part of the equation. So if this is the Football is King show. If football is truly going to be king, to the extent that I think Ohio State fans want it, Bill, something has to give.
Yes. And I think with the moves we've seen Ohio State make this offseason, as it pertains to the football program. Like, I think they're anticipating that, and I think that with the president and AD move, Ohio State is positioning itself for that world. Like, I don't know how soon we're going to get there. I don't think it's like a next year proposition. But I think the conversations about how to handle it start now, which is why Ohio State has hired a new AD who thinks football is king and puts it before anything else, and the university president who seems to be lockstep with that idea.
No schools in the SEC have an athletic program the size of Ohio State's. Texas A&M has 20 sports. That's where Ross Bjork's coming from, and that's pretty big. But the reason that they don't have as many sports is because they don't care, and because football is king. So if you want to compete with them and you want to be a little more like them, I'm not saying cut it down to 20 sports, but it might have to be more like 28 or 30 instead of 36, and that's just a reality.
Yeah.
All right. We hope you enjoyed the football is king discussion. We enjoy the usage of the word king whenever possible. So we will continue to use it. We will make capes. We will make swag. We will do anything to keep Kings of Columbus and Kings of the North on your mind and in the discussion. Find us on Kings of the North on our separate podcast and YouTube channels. Make sure you are constantly watching and listening to everything happening on the podcast channel, the Podcast Daily, Bermanology, Snap Judgments, the Rooster Show every Monday, everything else that we bring you. We're so happy to do it. And again, so grateful you guys are along for the ride. Mike Yarosowski is our great producer. He makes us look good and sound good. We'll take reviews on Apple Podcasts. Love to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, it's a fun time talking about Ohio State football here on Kings of Columbus. For Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of Columbus.